Looking through the archives of Resident Evil, you'll find many creatures that were cancelled from the games they were meant to be included in, and in this video, we'll be taking a look at some of those disturbing creatures that surprisingly never got officially released. Let's begin. Wesker's Monster. Wesker's Monster was a monkey-based creature that was designed to be included for Resident Evil 0 on the Nintendo 64. It was presented in a 2015 developer diary video during the production of the Resident Evil 0 remastered version. In the original storyline of Resident Evil 0, Albert Wesker was going to be the main villain of the game, and this monster was going to be the creature that kills off the STARS Bravo team members. But when the game ended up being remade for the GameCube, changes were made and Wesker was dropped as the game's main villain in favor of the mysterious young man due to problems trying to connect Zero with the first game. So Wesker's Monster was changed and redesigned as the Eliminator, the infected monkeys that did make it to the GameCube version of Resident Evil 0. So for this one, it was the creature's original design that was cancelled, and not the creature itself. Zombie Wildcat. The Zombie Wildcat was a creature that was meant to be included in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It was going to appear in the Raccoon City Park, but if you remember what enemies you find in this particular area, you'll realize that the Zombie Wildcat ended up being replaced by the Hunter Gamma, as they are seen everywhere throughout the Raccoon City Park. It would have been interesting to see Zombie Wildcats included in the game, especially since the Hunter Gammas ended up appearing in Resident Evil Outbreak series, and various others. So the inclusion of a Zombie Wildcat would have been something very interesting to see in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It could have made an appearance in the Outbreak series, appearing in the Raccoon City Zoo, but by the looks of it, it only got as far as the concept art sketch, and the Zombie Wildcat was forever rejected. Zombie Ape. The Zombie Ape was meant to be included in Resident Evil 2. You may remember it making an appearance in the early stages of Resident Evil 2 known as Resident Evil 1.5. The Zombie Ape did go further than just reaching a concept art design. It made it into the game itself. You can see that the creature can hang on the ceiling panels from the ventilation ducts and swing around like an ape. But even though the creature was complete, it still ended up being rejected from Resident Evil 2. The story behind it was that a number of local animals such as the zoo animals ended up being infected, and apes were some of the animals that got infected, and the way they'd be presented was by bursting out of an umbrella truck that was in the RPD's parking lot, suggesting that the apes were bioweapons that were being transported. The concept art and the in-game model are very different from each other, and the in-game version seems to be closer to resembling an ape rather than the concept art. They're both unique appearances, and it's a real shame that this creature ended up being cancelled even after having a creature model and AI already complete. The Man Spider. This cancelled creature is one of the most terrifying creatures that could have been included in Resident Evil 2. The Man Spider was going to appear in Raccoon City's underground lab, where it would escape and attack anyone that goes near it. In one of the trailers of Resident Evil 1.5, we can see that the G-Virus infected William Birkin is fighting against a Man Spider, demonstrating the game's choreographed cutscenes. And just like the Zombie Ape, the Man Spider's model and animations were completed, but surprisingly, it was still scrapped, and it is said that the liquor was its replacement. However, the Man Spider was said to appear in the underground lab of Umbrella, and the liquors make their first appearance near the beginning of the game. It's not a sure thing whether this is true or not, but let's hope that the remake of Resident Evil 2 can go ahead and include the Man Spider, as it appears to be one of the scariest designs that the franchise ever rejected. The Laughing Killer. The Laughing Killer was originally going to be introduced in Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles. The Laughing Killer had two anchors attached to its arms. These would be the weapons that replace its arms, and from the concept art we can see that he would have used them to hang from ceilings, possibly moving similar to the Chimeras from Resident Evil 1. There is a possibility that the Laughing Killer was an early concept that was replaced with Jabberwock S3, seeing as the Jabberwock has multiple limbs with anchor-shaped claws like the Laughing Killer, but it has never been confirmed yet. Tyrant Inferior. The Tyrant Inferior was a creature that was intended to appear in Resident Evil 2. It was going to be a zombie which had undergone a mutation, and according to a note written on the concept art of the Tyrant Inferior, the mutation is not unique and is statistically present in large hordes. There isn't much else that's been said about this creature. If it was meant to be a zombie that mutated and became a tyrant of its own, then that could mean that multiple zombie tyrants would be loose, which would have been a great addition to include in Resident Evil 2, because seeing as the tyrant was the main boss of Resident Evil 1, then seeing many zombie tyrants in the sequel would have been surprising to see. The transforming creature. It is not known exactly which Resident Evil title was meant to have the transforming creature, but there were two designs made for the creature. In Design A, we see that there is a female test subject wearing an umbrella branded gown, and she transforms into a creature with a pair of extra eyes in her forehead and with arms that would mutate into mouths halfway between the wrists and elbows, even including sharp claws and tongues. Design B was a far less humanoid version than the first, with much of her body being salivating mouths. There's even a mouth and tongue growing in the back of her head. It also looks like there are additional mouths growing around her body, as saliva and teeth can be seen with them. We can also see how the transformation creature would have attacked its victims. The way it would kill its prey would be by using its arm mouths to bite down on the victim's arms, preventing the victim from using any weapons and basically leaving them defenseless, and devour the head of its prey. The example used in this concept art was Jill Valentine in her Resident Evil 1 uniform, so it's possible that the transformation creature was meant to appear in the first Resident Evil game, but this is yet to be confirmed. The Mimic Creature. The Mimic Creature is the most interesting of all cancelled creatures. Mimic is another rejected creature design that was going to be in Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles. Seeing that its design was going to resemble the Plant 43 creatures, this could have been a reason why it ended up being scrapped. But even though it would have been an added creature to the story they showed based on Resident Evil 2, it would have fit in perfectly, as there are many different types of plants that could have been used to experiment on, so the Mimic Creature could have been introduced as another plant creature. However, this was not the only design made for the Mimic Creature. This is another concept art based on the Mimic Creature. This design appears to have tentacle arms and legs, with the head and torso that almost resembles a stingray. Maybe the artist was going for a water creature design, which does appear to look quite terrifying. Now, in this image we are shown how the creature would move. It has a turbulent flow, and the scariest thing about it is that it can easily camouflage itself with the environment. Shown in this concept art, we can see that the Mimic Creature would be able to camouflage itself with rocks, trees, branches, walls, you name it. If anything, this would be the perfect creature to face off against. I'm not sure if it would have been found in the Resident Evil 2 segment of the Dark Side Chronicles, but one thing for sure is that this creature should never have been cancelled. If anything, it would have added a scary creature that could surprise attack you when you least expect it. If you've seen the 2017 movie Life, then you'd know that the Mimic Creature could have been the scariest creature of them all. If Capcom takes another look at the cancelled creatures, then hopefully they can add the Mimic Creature to the Resident Evil 2 remake. The disturbing experiments conducted in the Spencer Lab. These are even more experiments that we did not witness at the Spencer Lab in the original RE1. Frogs with large protrusion, rats with a similar case, rats growing within an infected snake, possible leeches, other insects that might evolve through a short period of time, horrifying arachnids with an extended spine-like tail, and infected crabs, which would then open their upper shell before they attack. These are the creatures that even psychotic inmates would have nightmares of. Here, we are even shown that the arachnid type of experiment would latch onto the victim's head from behind and even inject its tail through the victim's back, where it would possibly fuse its tail with the spine of its prey and likely begin controlling them, like that of a parasite. But with everything we witnessed at the Spencer Mansion as well as the lab and guardhouse, there could be no room for this level of insanity. Welcome to the next part of the Resident Evil Cancelled Creatures segment. Last time we took a look at some bizarre creature designs that could have made the series even scarier than before, but there are still more hideous and frightening creatures to observe. So without any delays, let's begin. The Kidnapper. The Kidnapper was a rejected creature design that was meant to make an appearance in Resident Evil The Darkside Chronicles, and by the looks of the concept art, we can see that the Kidnapper was a bird of prey with powerful talons that are capable of picking up a person. Now there isn't much information regarding this creature, but seeing that its design doesn't really look unique except for the large talons, must be why the Kidnapper was cancelled. But for the gameplay of the Darkside Chronicles, it would have been a right fit for a boss fight in the game, seeing as the game is a rail shooter, and a giant bird that flies around and picks up a character seems like an enjoyable boss fight. There's no telling whether this Kidnapper would pick up its victims and drop them from a high distance, or slash its prey with its enormous talons. One thing for sure is that this would have become the first giant infected bird that we'd ever face off against in a Resident Evil game. Kamadoma. The Kamadoma was a giant infected cricket that was seen as a cancelled creature in the Resident Evil archives. Its name is the Japanese term for Rhaphidophoridae, a family of crickets also known as spider crickets, but a giant cricket doesn't exactly appear as threatening as a giant spider, so maybe this is why the Kamadoma only went as far as a sketch. So far it isn't revealed to which game the Kamadoma was supposed to appear in. However, the Resident Evil Archives guide describes all the key events that occurred in Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica. So it's anyone's guess as to which of these games the Kamadoma was possibly going to appear in. Now aside from that, its design looks slightly similar to the Reaper from Resident Evil 5. It is very likely that the Kamadoma was what inspired the design for the Reaper, but what do you think? The Sea Snake. The Sea Snake was a rejected creature design that was also seen in the Resident Evil archives, and just like the Kamadoma, it hasn't been revealed as to which game the Sea Snake was meant to appear in. And if you take a look at its design, it looks very similar to the Gravedigger from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. The sketch to the left side shows Jill in her Resident Evil 1 uniform, except for the shorts. So it's not a sure thing whether this Sea Snake was meant to be in Resident Evil 1, possibly replacing the infected sharks. But if this cancelled creature looks a lot like the Gravedigger from Resident Evil 3, then that could easily explain why the creators decided against using this Sea Snake. However, its resemblance may be the only thing it shares with the Gravedigger, because it looks as if this creature was meant to appear in an underwater location. And if so, then which game between Resident Evil 0 through Code Veronica was meant to include an underwater location? The bee-infested ivy creatures of Resident Evil 2. Seems like we were lucky to not encounter this type of ivy creature, as I could only imagine how difficult it would be to deal with a pair of ivy creatures that not only spit poison at its prey, but they'd be swarming with giant bees like the ones from the first Resident Evil game at the guardhouse. But in all honesty, they should have been included because it adds to the variety of ivy creatures and ways of dealing with them. Usually one would just stick to using the grenade launcher to easily deal with them, but if they included a type of ivy creature that's swarming with bees, then we'd have a reason to utilize the machine gun even if it deals less damage, as it would be a means of sacrificing ammunition over taking extra damage. Dolly. The Dolly was a creature that was originally going to be in Resident Evil 0, but ended up being replaced by the Plague Crawler instead. The Plague Crawler was an arthropod species that was genetically engineered as part of Dr. James Marcus's early experimentations into the T-virus based bioorganic weapons. The initials DALI stand for DNA Arranged Lack of Intelligence. Comparing both the Dolly and Plague Crawlers, I'd say that the Dolly has scarier features, as it almost looks like a failed experiment that happened to evolve, and the Plague Crawlers look more like giant insects. It's only 7.9 inches tall, so its model would have been completely different from the Plague Crawlers, as those were almost 2 meters in length. Originally, the Dolly started off as an enemy that would hang off the ceiling in a cocoon, and it would eventually evolve and fall to the ground. But the reason why this creature was mainly scrapped was because the creators thought that it would be difficult for players to look up or to show the ceiling, and that its nature was hard to grasp, and it felt out of place among the other creatures. Now, if you had to choose between both creatures and cancel one of them, you never would have guessed that the dolly was cancelled, as it appears to be much more terrifying, and one can only imagine what its tail is used for. The mollusk enemy. The mollusk enemy was a creature that was rejected for Resident Evil 6. There isn't much information about this creature except that it was intended to be a human-based creature, but would walk in an awkward fashion, similar to a person walking on their hands. That sounds like a very creative way to make a creature's movements look scarier than its appearance, and it would have been interesting to see exactly what it would look like. Unfortunately, we only have one sketch showing us what the mollusk would sort of look like, as well as how it would attack. But what exactly was this cancelled creature's finished concept art look like? And what would its origins be? Flying creature. The flying creature was also a rejected creature that was meant to appear in Resident Evil 6. There's little to no information regarding this flying creature, and just like the mollusk enemy, it would only go as far as one sketch design. It almost looks like it would resemble a giant dragonfly, and it would fly in groups, so taking them down would either be a bit challenging or a lot of fun if you're using a submachine gun. Maybe the flying creature was meant to appear in a helicopter scene, but we'll never know until the creators confirmed it. The Spider-Man. The Spider-Man is not your typical friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. At first, I thought this creature design was a different design from the man spider that we looked at in the previous cancelled creatures video, but it appears that this was its own creature design that was meant to make an appearance in Resident Evil 0. Its design is by all means a creepy concept, and it appears that a spider is clinging into a human and controlling it. The creators were going to try and make this Spider-Man move like both a spider and a person, but just like the dolly, the creators thought that this creature was too much of a departure from the other Resident Evil monsters at the time, so they decided to cut this creature from the game. One can only imagine how this creepy Spider-Man would move and attack its prey. Would it use web to try and tie its victims with it? Would it bite and poison you like the giant spiders? Or would it try and take control of your character next if it ended up killing you? Let's hope to someday find out. Golgotha. Golgotha was a creature that was originally considered to be the final boss for Resident Evil 2, but it was rejected in 1996, and it was also going to be able to mutate into a second form referred to as Super Golgotha. And for unknown reasons, Golgotha would feature Albert Wesker's face at the end of its tail. But in the early stages of Resident Evil 2, known as Resident Evil 1.5, a creature with a similar body to Golgotha appeared in the footage of 1.5. However, it could also be the early versions of William Birkin in his G-Virus infected form. And as a side note, the creature's name originates from Golgotha, a hill outside Jerusalem which the biblical Gospels write as the site of Jesus' crucifixion. Now, seeing as the Resident Evil 2 remake is on its way, there might just be a chance to see this cancelled creature make an appearance and see for ourselves if this creature was good enough to bring back from the dead. But with that said, we're back for another look at the cancelled creatures of the Resident Evil series. There are still more designs and sketches that never made it to their respective titles, so get ready as we look back at some of the most bizarre creature designs seen in the Resident Evil archives. Let's begin. Zombie Horse. The Zombie Horse was meant to make an appearance in Resident Evil 2, and as shown in the art sketch, its mutation would make them grow bigger than their original height. The way they'd attack their victims would be by trampling them to death. It's implied that they'd be included because of the reliance of horses in the American Midwest, and they'd be bound to appear somewhere in Raccoon City. It's very likely that they would have been a challenge to face off against. They would have been the tallest creatures in the game, and seeing the difference in height next to a person means that they would have been even taller than William Birkin in his G-infected forms, excluding his final form. But seeing as the Zombie Horse was a rejected creature designed for Resident Evil 2, then this could mean that the zombie horse might just get the chance to appear in the Resident Evil 2 remake. I'd like to see what else the zombie horse could end up doing aside from trampling its victims, like kicking the player far back, making you slam against the wall. That'd be something new. Or biting the player and swinging them around before tossing you aside. Let's hope to see this cancelled creature make its official appearance soon. Veronica Zombie. The Veronica Zombie is also known as a South African zombie, and this cancelled creature was meant to appear in Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles in the Operation Javier scenario. As you can see, this creature does not look like a regular zombie, but instead it looks more like a tyrant. But just like the tyrant inferior, it was going to be a zombie that went through further mutation after being exposed to the virus, only this time it's the T. Veronica virus. So its appearance is more like a tyrant with insect-like features, as shown in its left arm. This is the second cancelled creature that would have been a new type of zombie tyrant. It's a shame that it's happened twice with two unique creatures, but it's probably for the best, as it would have meant that we'd be facing off against hordes of tyrants, and maybe the only possibility of preventing zombies from becoming these zombie tyrants would be by burning the bodies before they mutate any further. Richard from Revelations. Richard was an officer in the Federal Bioterrorism Commission. The FBC sent him on a mission to the cruise liner known as the Queen Zenobia, but unfortunately for him, he was ambushed and killed by the ooze creatures. Now, unlike most cancelled creatures, Richard actually did make an appearance, but only in the demo pilot of Resident Evil Revelations, which was featured in the Resident Evil 3DS game known as Mercenaries 3D. He was, however, replaced by Rachel Foley in the final version of the game, who would receive the same concept as Richard. She would die the same way and become an ooze creature herself. Looking at Richard's ooze creature design, his appearance resembles an ooze creature more than Rachel's design. His face is very deformed and disturbing to look at. What's even more shocking is that after he was semi-revived by the T-Abyss mutation, he was conscious for the start of the mutation and decided to write a diary in his last moments before being fully taken over by the T-Abyss virus. Richard might have become a memorable character in Revelations, but being replaced by Rachel Foley would strike a much bigger impact, as most players would take pity on an attractive woman that could not be saved no matter how fast they tried to reach her. Tortured. The Tortured was a creature design that was rejected for Resident Evil 6. It was designed as a mid-range enemy, and the way it would attack the player would be by releasing lice from its body and have the infected lice attack the player. Can you imagine having to deal with such a grotesque looking enemy that attacks by releasing lice on you? Each concept looks very different from one another. They are concepts, so if the Tortured had become an enemy in the game, then they probably would have chosen from one of these concepts. If not, then there would have been 3 different types of tortured creature concepts that we'd encounter in Resident Evil 6. U9. The U9 was a creature that was meant to appear in Resident Evil 5, and telling by the size of the creature next to a person would mean that the U9 would surely become a boss creature in the game. The U9 does appear to resemble the Ouroboros creatures that made it to the game, so that could be the reason why the U9 was cancelled. But if the U9 had made it into the game, then it's possible that it would have been the tallest creature in the Resident Evil series. The U9 would also have 2 forms, one where it's hunched over and the other where it stands upright. There's a concept art where the U9 is seen decapitated, so maybe that's how you are going to have to defeat it, by blowing off its head. And this would lead to the U9 going into its second form. The only real difference seen from its second form is that the protrusions on its back have grown into additional arms. It's unknown to whether blowing off its head is how you defeat the creature in both times, but I guess we'll never know. U11. The U11 was also a cancelled creature for Resident Evil 5, and according to sources, this creature was originally going to be Irvin, who was originally an experiment by Trisel and would have become a boss in the game. Also, looking at the concept art, we can see that this boss would make its appearance on top of a moving train. Analyzing its design, the U11 has very similar features to the U9. It almost looks like it's a transformation after the U9's second form, but so far there isn't any information regarding this. One thing for sure is that this could have been an interesting boss to fight against on top of a moving train. The mutated tyrants of Resident Evil 1. It is unclear whether this was intended to be the tyrant for the first Resident Evil game or just another creature you would encounter throughout the game. It could be a hunter variant, a chimera variant, a mutated tyrant, or a mix of all three. That's the feeling I get from seeing this. Its appearance would be too frightening to see around the Spencer mansion, as well as the caves and the Umbrella Lab for sure, but if you look at that tusk that flaps from its shoulder, it looks like it stays down most of the time, covering its insides. And if that's the case, then maybe its skin is hard to penetrate through. And it's even possible that its left shoulder can too include this tusk limb that protracts from its chest and shoulder. These traits would make this creature one of the most terrifying things to encounter for both its appearance and physical attributes. Mysterious Enemy. The Mysterious Enemy was a cancelled creature design that was shown in the Resident Evil archives. It hasn't been mentioned to which game this cancelled creature was meant to be in, but seeing as it was shown in the first Resident Evil archives means that this creature was meant to be in either Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, or Code Veronica. If I had to throw in a guess, I'd say this creature looks like it would have belonged in Code Veronica, as most creatures in that game looked a lot more different than the creatures in the previous games. The description indicates that this mysterious enemy was capable of jumping over 10 meters high. There is no information regarding the virus it was created with, or whether this mysterious enemy was meant to be a boss or a group of enemies you'd encounter. Let's wait and see if we ever run into this type of creature. Unless its characteristics made it into a different creature of its intended game. The Dissolving Human. The Dissolving Human was a creature that was intended to fall apart with every shot that was fired at it, eventually turning it into a pool of liquid when killed. Unfortunately, just like the mysterious enemy, it is unknown as to which Resident Evil game the Dissolving Human was meant to be in. All we know is that it appeared in the Resident Evil archives, letting us know that it was a cancelled creature for either Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, or Code Veronica. The Dissolving Human sounds very similar to the Ebiton from the House of the Dead franchise, so it's possible that the Dissolving Human was cancelled because of its likeness to the Ebiton from a different zombie video game franchise. Powered Up Zombie. The powered up zombies were going to be stronger versions of a zombie, with an upper body that strongly resembles the Licker. There were also many creature designs for the powered up zombies with little to no human characteristics on any of them whatsoever. The Licker-like creature seems to be the only one that walks on 2 feet. Every design of the powered up zombie has, without a doubt, a terrifying design that would have kept most of us classic players away from the controller if they actually made it into the game. Seeing as there's a Licker-like zombie would mean that the powered up zombie was going to make an appearance in Resident Evil 2. It would have been undeniably scary to encounter any of these designs. It's actually a real shame that we never got to see the powered up zombie appear in the game. Hopefully Capcom takes one last look at the powered up zombie designs before fully releasing the Resident Evil 2 remake, as I'm sure they would add one hell of an experience to the game. Zayram. If you remember in the previous cancelled creatures list, Golgotha was originally considered to be the final boss for Resident Evil 2. However, Zayram and Golgotha were both designed as possibilities for the final boss of the game. But in the end, their transformations were given to G to make William Birkin the final boss instead. So next time you face off against William Birkin by the end of the game, know that the characteristics of Zayram and Golgotha were merged to give William Birkin the transformation you're facing off against. Perhaps we'll get to see more characteristics of Zayram or Golgotha presented in William Birkin's transformations for the new Resident Evil 2 remake. And now, for a final surprise, we'll be taking a look at a character or more like a creature that could have been included in Resident Evil 2, but was surely cut from the game because of the circumstances and final moments of the game. If you remember, Annette Birkin was killed by William Birkin in his G-infected form, meaning that Annette Birkin was going to become a G-infected creature herself. There was even a design made for a scenario where Annette Birkin would mutate as well, thanks to the G cells in her blood. But once again, the opportunity to see this character reach this transformation is possible now that the remake for Resident Evil 2 is on its way. Annette Birkin could have become a G-infected creature, nearly preventing the player from escaping. Or better yet, maybe she can make an appearance but only in Hunk's scenario of the fourth survivor. That way, it makes sense that she mutated after Leon, Claire, and Sherry escaped. We'll just have to wait and see. Last year, we took a look at many cancelled creatures in the Resident Evil series. Originally, this was meant to be a 3-part series, but with further research and the addition of the latest remakes that have recently released, we now have more creatures to observe as well. These are dark times, so if dwelling into the forgotten sphere of the abandoned concepts is what you want, then let's begin. The Contamination Monster. Seeing as Resident Evil 0 stuck with giant insect creatures as enemies aside from zombies, it's not surprising to see that this abomination was left out of the game. This could have been a carrier of the virus who would roam throughout the game, infecting certain areas to make it difficult for the player to backtrack if rooms and corridors are foggy and contaminated. The Leech Man would certainly be the least of your worries if this creature were included in Resident Evil 0. With such a disturbing appearance, you would most certainly not want to see what this thing is capable of, or how it attacks its victims, and how it kills them. Adult Plagas. Ever wonder what a fully grown Plagas parasite would look like without a host to bury itself in? These are the original concepts for an adult Plagas, and in some ways, it looks more disturbing than the ones controlling a host's body. Seeing as there are 4 examples of the adult Plagas, this could indicate that they all have a unique appearance from one another, or these are simply 4 alternate designs for the adult Plagas. And since this is a parasite, I'd like to think that it has a variety of designs. Perhaps they vary on the environment, adapting to it, which would explain why one version closely resembles a slug, and why others have enormous jaws. I can't even imagine what this one does and how it latches onto its victims. I'd say let's hope for something like the adult Plagas to make an appearance in the Resident Evil 4 remake, but those delusions are quite slim, seeing as none of the cancelled creatures made it on the recent remakes. Colmillos. The Colmillos are the Plaga-infested wolves that appear in Resident Evil 4. In one way, these creatures weren't cancelled, but their original design did end up scrapped. If you look at the design they went with, it's likely that they went with it because it referenced John Carpenter's The Thing. Something utterly understandable. But when compared to the cancelled concept, it's not much more terrifying than an ordinary looking wolf that sprouted whips out of its back. It looks like the original Cerberus, but with the head of an arachnid-like parasite. This is one of the most daunting looking designs for a new creature. A combination of the zombie dog with the head fully mutated into this thing. One thing for sure, that maze garden in Resident Evil 4 would have been 10 times more terrifying if the Colmillos looked a lot like this. Let's move on to the Lurking Man. The Lurking Man had so many grotesque forms, starting from a lump of slime molding into a tall figure with outstretched arms. If shot at, it would simply regenerate its open wounds. Perhaps his appearance was meant to change while you fought against it, seeing as there are multiple designs of the Lurking Man changing forms from a liquefied being to a rotting corpse covered in black slime. The description on its evolutionary form reads that it should look like guns can't hurt it, as well as being big with poor eyesight. If ordinary firepower cannot penetrate it, then it is very likely that this creature was replaced with a regenerator, as its features appear to be too similar. The obvious difference being that the Lurking Man was most likely going to change its appearance over time, whereas the regenerator only has one particular design. The Regenerator was one of the most iconic creatures in the game. It was the scariest enemy of Resident Evil 4, so if they had to choose between the Regenerator and the Lurking Man, it's understandable that they'd choose the Regenerator instead. If anything, the Lurking Man could have been the original design for the Regenerator. And if they had gone with the Lurking Man, then does that mean that its many transformations would have taken part in the game as well? But if you think these cancelled Plagas designs were a missed opportunity, I'd say we need to look at even more cancelled Plagas creatures such as these. If you ask me, I would have scrapped most of the Plagas henchmen carrying firearms and crossbows to make room for these. An obese creature that was possibly created using multiple body parts from others, creating this eerie parasitic Frankenstein, having multiple eyes on its head or enormous eyes bulging out of its back. This creature would stalk its enemies through sound. Or how about these grotesque creatures? One that sprouts tentacles through its arms, including its face. I'd imagine it would wrap those tentacles around Leon's arms to prevent him from cutting them off with his combat knife, as well as preventing him from using any firearms, as it chews through his face. I must admit that even though these concepts weren't utilized, some of their features must have been used for other creatures that were in the game, or even a separate game such as Resident Evil Revelations. Is it a possibility? Speaking of Revelations, there were a great number of creature designs that were cut from the game. The creator of these designs mentioned that the vision was to create a creature that combines the affection of its beauty with the sea and enemy. But it appears that none of these were utilized. Quite the shame, to be honest. If creatures such as these ones ended up in the game, I think they would have fit in perfectly with the locations presented. This abominable snowman would have been an interesting creature to face off against, instead of just taking down packs of T-Abyss-infected wolves. As for this creature design, maybe not the best choice to include an oversized lobster, as it's more humorous than frightening. The artist for these creature designs was Koki Kinoshita, and he had this to say. The idea of a body made of compound eyes was the first thought, because the illusion is shown with the eyes. It is a system that projects the luminescent substance in the body to the surroundings using the lens of the eye. However, I felt that I could not understand it at the first glance. The idea that the center of the face was split and a huge eye appeared was born here. Like with the early final boss designs for the original Resident Evil 2, there were multiple designs for Jack Norman's infected forms. The main goal was to create a tyrant capable of causing illusions to anything looking directly at its eye or eyes, tricking its victims into seeing copies approaching them. It is undeniable that these creature designs are exceedingly impressive, and having to choose a specific design would be devastating for the rest that get stored in the archives. The Licker Mid-Mutation. This is one of the latest cancelled creatures of the series, a zombie undergoing its Licker mutation. This was a creature that would be introduced in the Resident Evil 2 remake, but somewhere down the line, the decision came to cut the creature as they did with many original enemies like the infected crows, spiders, and many others. Its designs are very petrifying. Zombies in the remake became tougher to handle, so if one of them were to transform into this mid-mutation of a Licker, you would undoubtedly run towards the opposite direction before it grabs you with its extended tongue. Imagine dealing with a horde of zombies when suddenly one of them begins mutating into this creature in front of you, extending its tongue to hit you from a distance, or worse, it begins pulling you towards it, giving the horde of zombies the biggest upper hand. Some would say that this was a missed opportunity for a creature this troubling, but here's my theory. If you look at the designs for this creature, you can tell that the developers tried to make it work, because we did receive a new enemy, but it was instead introduced in the remake of Resident Evil 3. Since this creature is not fully mutated, its primary attack would be to extend its tongue and attack the player with it. It will surely grab onto the player if close enough, and it would most likely mutate into this state in front of the player. These are the same feats that come from a parasite zombie. If this is true, then it appears that the new Licker mid-mutation zombie was complete, but its design would be altered so it becomes a new enemy type for the Resident Evil 3 remake. There are a couple extra cancelled creatures revealed alongside the Licker mid-mutation concepts. It is unknown whether they too would take part as an alternate design for this specific cancelled creature. but it is possible that the zombie in the wheelchair is an early concept for the detonator zombies introduced in Resident Evil Resistance. And as for the experimented zombie, what was its purpose? Was this an early stage of a test subject that would become a palehead zombie? Cancelled creatures have been a very popular topic in the series. They give us a glimpse of what could have been a part of the franchise, something you could have faced off against. We will never know if they would have made the games more difficult or scarier. They could have become iconic creatures that fans would have welcomed back into the series. In Resident Evil Code Veronica, there was one creature that we never got to take on. Luckily, of course, because there is no way any of us would want to bump into a putrid mutation such as this. What kind of experiment could this have been? Signs show that it was once human, but its legs indicate that it could have been a beast. But the mutated limbs, its facial deformities, and open holes throughout its body don't make it any easier to pinpoint what kind of experiment this thing was supposed to be. However, there are a couple signs that indicate that the same parasite used on the Nemesis could have been used with this creature as well. For example, stitches on its chest and abdomen, and the sprouting tentacles throughout its body. But what's different here is that it appears to be shedding its own skin. That is why I keep asking myself, what the hell was this thing supposed to be? We're back with possibly the last cancelled creatures video for the Resident Evil franchise. Most of the cancelled creatures on this list are from the Outbreak games, so get ready to witness some of the strangest and impressive designs for new enemy types that, in my opinion, should have been included for a more terrifying experience. The two-headed Cerberus. Like with most creatures on this list, the two-headed Cerberus was meant to appear in the Outbreak games. I've never seen a hairless dog like this before, well, not until I played Silent Hill. But seeing that it has more than two eyes, it's very likely that this mutated Cerberus was the cause of the G-Virus, as we've seen what it does to its victims. The G-Virus will create a new head for its host, shifting the other to its side near its chest. Additional eyes will grow around its shoulder and torso, and claws will sprout from its limbs. Only here, it appears that claws have grown in more areas of its body, such as its spinal cord, its leg hocks, its forehead, the right ear, and its front feet have enlarged claws that resemble that of a velociraptor. If a creature such as this one had only appeared in the Resident Evil 1 remake, I'd say it would be the perfect specimen to use its secondary head to prevent itself from being countered with a defensive item. However, since it's likely that this Cerberus is infected with the G-Virus, then it wouldn't be possible to include it in the RE1 remake. And the downside of the Outbreak games is that the Cerberus were barely included in any scenarios. The best locations to include the two-headed Cerberus would have been the Raccoon University, due to the experimentations of Dr. Greg Mueller, the Raccoon City streets, as you'd assume that stray dogs would end up infecting themselves after attacking the G-Virus infected rats, or the Umbrella facility where the G-Virus was developed. But if this was to be its first stage of the G-Virus, then what would its second form look like? And for that matter, what would its final form look like? But Capcom did end up using this concept for another game, the Devil May Cry series, and that design is even more grotesque than the Resident Evil Outbreak designs. And if we look at the 3D model that was created for the creature in the Outbreak series, it does not even compare to the Devil May Cry version. And all of its traits, such as the eyeballs and enormous claws, are a clear downgrade compared to the concept art. Giant rats. Seeing as the rats were the carriers of the virus, it's quite the surprise to see that rats were never an enemy type that you had to deal with in the city streets or in the sewers for that matter. And if they infected themselves with both the T-Virus and the G-Virus, then surely there had to be hordes of mutated and enlarged rats throughout the city. And this concept art shows us that initially there were giant-sized rats roaming throughout the streets, still scavenging for food in trash bins. Rats will eat practically anything, especially meat, so survivors were lucky to never stumble upon any of these enlarged rodents. This may be the only concept art we have for infected rats, and since the T-Virus can make a small creature grow in a considerably large size, then the big rats shown here must be infected with the T-Virus. So, what could we possibly expect to see from the rats infected with the G-Virus? The Hunter Gamma Mutations. The Hunter Gamma Mutations were featured in the concept art for the Resident Evil 3 remake. There are 3 designs that were not included in the game, which is quite upsetting when you see the design they went with. Starting with the one on the right. It is uncannily striking to the original design from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which resembled more of a frog than a hunter, sort of a combination of the two. But here, it appears as a more ferocious take, much more menacing and putrid with an elongated arm similar to that of a tyrant. I'd say it's the perfect design to go with for a new Gamma Hunter. But that's not saying that the other 2 designs aren't comparable in quality. This one may be missing an arm, but a vein-like tentacle is sprouting from its injury, which could be used to grab its victim from a distance, or pierce the tip on its victim to poison them, or worse, paralyze them. It also appears to not have any eyes, but it's possible that it can still see or sense its prey, and those vigorous jaws look like a one-hit kill. Nothing could possibly survive a chomp from that. Then the design on the left is pure nightmare-inducing. Everything about its appearance is remarkable, in a terrifying way. It's almost as if it's a mix between a xenomorph and a BOW hunter. Imagine encountering a creature such as this one where it uses dark areas to its advantage, making great use of a one-hit stealth kill. In the final version of the remake, one-hit kills from a hunter gave players a more annoyed reaction than a frightening one, but with the right creature in the right areas, you'd likely get a terrified reaction from this one. If anything, the remake should have included them all and gave them each a new name, which wouldn't be difficult at all seeing as their names are chosen from the Greek alphabet. And I believe the perfect remake would have included new creatures rather than removing previous existing ones. So here, I would have named them the Hunter Kappa, the Hunter Zeta, and this one would have to be the true Hunter Gamma. With the exclusions of many ordinary creatures such as the giant spiders or infected crows, it's a mild astonishment to see the Hunter Gammas included in the remake, but I think we all prefer something to the likes of bizarre mutations such as these particular designs over something that resembles a raw chicken. And even though these 3 cancelled creature designs are the far superior ones, it is probable that the developers of the Resident Evil 3 remake chose the raw chicken design for the fact that its open mouth resembles the mouth of the enormous gravedigger creature, as that boss creature would be excluded as well from the game, and this was their way of making up for its absence. The giant alligator in the Raccoon City Zoo. It's possible that this giant alligator was excluded seeing as we already encountered a giant alligator in Resident Evil 2, so we can't say that we're missing out on this, especially since the Raccoon City Zoo did include normal-sized alligators. But even then, we sure would have been caught by surprise if the final boss from the Wild Things scenario was not only a random chance of fighting the infected lion or the infected elephant, but also the giant alligator. The Armored Ganados and Female Zealots. These particular characters were meant to appear in Resident Evil 4, and most likely the player would encounter them in the Salazar Castle. The description for the 2 enemy types above mentioned that hitting their armor makes noise, even if using a silencer, and that they must be hit through the cracks in their armor. If making noise is part of their gimmick, then it's possible that they could have been used to alert enemies or the toughest brute in their fortress, the Garradores. As for the female zealots, they too should have been included seeing as there are no female members in the Salazar Castle. Not only that, but their appearance is quite unique. Every enemy that sprouts the parasite from inside them will only expose itself from the head of its host. But it's possible that these female members would sprout the parasite from one arm, making them a one-of-a-kind Plagas host. It would also have been interesting to see how this one fights using a sword. Would she approach slowly like the others? Or would she move quickly to throw off the player and strike faster, as her attire does not appear to be armored, but rather fabric similar to the appearance of a jester? Either way, these female zealots would have been greatly admired by the players. The mid-mutation lickers. These mid-mutation lickers are by far the biggest missed opportunity for not only the Outbreak games, but for the franchise in general. Lickers have been included in many variations throughout the series, starting with their original design to the evolved liquors and even bigger versions such as the liquor beta. But for some reason, out of all the times they tried to introduce a liquor mid-mutation, the creature concept would continuously get rejected. Throughout these cancelled creatures videos, we've seen a vast majority of disturbing monsters, and as we delved through countless concepts, we would always bear witness to a mid-mutation liquor. During the original trilogy, we saw the concept art for the powered-up liquor, which was the codename for the mid-mutation liquor. For the Outbreak series, we were close to getting the mid-mutation liquor once again, and the last chance was with the Resident Evil 2 remake, as they too provided us with new concept art for a zombie in its mid-mutation stage as a liquor. But I believe they scrapped that creature for the Nemesis Alpha Parasite zombies. It was the last opportunity to finally include the mid-mutation liquor, but if you ask me, that particular design does not compare to the concept art designs for the mid-mutation liquors of the Outbreak series. These are the best and most creative designs for a zombie that slowly becomes a liquor. I, for one, am not a fan of the new childlike liquor designs that we received for the Outbreak series, as they simply appear as normal liquors with no muscle definition, and they are smaller in size. And since we don't see any ordinary liquors anywhere in both Outbreak games, it makes you believe that these are ordinary liquors, but with a new design, especially since the hunters got a new design themselves. And those, in my opinion, are an improvement over the original hunter designs. However, the developers did bother to create a creature model for the liquors that first appeared in the Resident Evil 2 game, yet they did not include them in the Outbreak games. In the end, it's baffling to see that they turned down the best designs for a mid-mutation liquor and approved the worst design in my personal opinion. And they never approved a single mid-mutation liquor out of all the times it was brought back with a new design. In the Hellfire scenario of the first Outbreak game, we do encounter the Regis liquor, who happens to be a mid-liquor mutation, so it's great that we can actually say that there technically is a mid-liquor mutation in the game. But seeing as every small liquor comes to its aid whenever she is attacked, it could mean that she was a pregnant victim who was turning into a liquor, but became a type of queen liquor that was responsible for all the small liquors that we encountered, especially if there was going to be liquors with their original designs crawling around, showing us that the small liquors aren't just a new design for the original liquors at all. The liquor mutations. These liquor mutations are incredible and obscure. This is something that too could have been implemented with the liquors. After seeing liquors being utilized in almost every RE game and movie adaptation, it's obvious that it's become a staple to the series. That is why I see the mid-liquor mutations as a missed opportunity to be included, and after seeing these, it's even more baffling to see the incredible potential that was wasted by not including these liquor mutations in the series itself. There's no other way of putting it. They are spine-chilling, unparalleled when put side by side with the creature designs that were approved. So seeing all these cancelled creatures for the Outbreak series alone, it really shows us how these fantastic Outbreak games would have been even more monumental and unforgettable to the series. Even the Hunter Gammas were going to appear slightly different from before. Makes you wonder if they had some DNA of that of a snail mixed in with the frog DNA to create these Hunter Gammas, since their eyes seem to be retractable eyes. Same question applies with the mutated liquor with the same features in its eyes. Retractable eyes on a liquor would have made them even more aggressive if they no longer had to rely on hearing or sensing their nearby prey. And if those weren't terrifying enough, imagine dealing with a large mutated creature that nearly resembles a Tyrannosaurus Rex, or any of these mysterious creatures by its side. It's possible that they could have been additional hunter variations, but what was the story behind them? What was this T-Rex type of enemy supposed to be? In Resident Evil 6, they did include a boss type that closely resembles a T-Rex, but I find it more interesting when it's something that was created with a strain of the T-Virus or any of the experiments that were being conducted within Raccoon City, as those come close enough to feeling like real experiments, as opposed to the ones in the later games starting with Resident Evil 4 and beyond. That's it for the video. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button to give this video a chance to grow. I'd like to thank all my Patreon supporters for their impeccable generosity. Your support means a lot to me, and you are part of the reason why I try to make the best content that I can. And if you like this content, check out the rest of my channel. You'll find more entertainment from separate franchises I like to cover, such as Mortal Kombat, Dragon Ball Z, Celebrity Deathmatch, Men in Black, The Mask, Batman comics, The Terminator, TMNT, Dino Crisis, Resident Evil, and more. If you're a Patreon supporter, check out my exclusive videos such as the Gantz content. And if you'd like to show your support, go to my Patreon and support the channel, which is only $1. Sacrifice that McChicken for extra quality content, my friend. But anyways, I'll see you all in the next video, and remember to have an awesome day.